Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn. And joining me today is a man who's kept fuel duty frozen for no less than 15 years and counting through Fair Fuel UK. He's saved all of us, literally hundreds of billions, is what he says. He's the former Reform UK London Mayoral candidate, now an advanced UK heavyweight, and fresh from his explosive ex-post on the oil crisis with Brent crude, swinging wildly from nearly $120 to 107 in the last 24 hours. I'm delighted to welcome the wonderful Howard Cox. How are you, Howard?
Yeah, I'm fine, Andrew, and thank you for having me on, my good friend.
It's really good to hear you from you. And what I love, we were just discussing before you came on air, your on morning routine because you have your wonderful dog, Tuppy, Tuppence.
Yeah,
talk,
yeah.
talk to me about rescuing her before we talk about rescuing the people.
Well, it's we've always had dogs, my wife Jenny and I, and we just we adore them. They actually keep our marriage sane as well. They're not having a dog in between there because if we do have an argument, the dog usually sits in between us and says, "Stop this at once." But yeah, every morning we go out about 5 o'clock into I live very close to what's called Hempstead Woods in near Cranbrook in Kent, and it's just wonderful, peaceful. You hear the woodpeckers, you hear the pheasant, you hear and you can see deer and all that sort of thing. But she is a dog that was one of eight who were actually thrown out. I think seven of them died in a plastic bag. People do horrible things like that, and she's a Romanian rescue. And she's we when we got her, she was only a small thing, but now she's 45 kilos. She's a huge dog, and which is quite amusing to see. But she's just full of love and everything. And the only thing she doesn't like is small children. So we have
Oh,
to
is
be
that?
careful.
Oh dear. Okay, no interesting stuff. Well, they always say, look, a dog is a man's best friend, but diamonds are a girl's best friend. So I don't know how that worked out.
Well, I'm not. I don't have the sort of income you have, Andrew.
Ah,
I
you
mean,
see. But talking about income, I mean, you saved. I mean, that's the headline, isn't it? You saved the taxpayer literally billions of pounds through your efforts. Tell me about how that started and how you've actually saved those billions.
well, it was very simple, really. I was, something like in 2010, I was doing some consultancy work for small businesses, which effectively marketing communications. This was pre the big social media boom. It was around social media there, and I was actually running courses on how to set up a Facebook account. I mean, it's ridiculous now what we have now, but seriously, and I was working with a small logistics company in Kent. They had about 50 trucks, ranging from something like 5 to 10 truckers, all the way up to 44-ton articulated trucks. And one day I was sitting down with the CEO in his office having a cup of tea with him, talking about, just everything about life generally. And there was a spreadsheet in front of him. And from my days of when I was in pharmaceutical repping, I could read upside down, talking to doctors and quite easily. And I noticed there was a line on his P&L, profit and loss sheet, which said fuel. And I just saw his percentage of his costs. And it was in the region of 44% of his costs was fuel, of
Right.
which at that time 70% went to the government in tax. And I simply said, "How do you cope with this?" He said, "Oh, we can't. We live on a permanent knife edge of viability because of fuel costs." And I said, "Well, what are we doing about it?" He said, "Well, the Road Haulage Association, the Freight Transport Association, they write their regular monthly, yearly letters at budget time. Please keep fuel duty frozen." And that's all they do. They didn't do anything really, with a bit of active sort of campaigning, which is what I've become known for. And okay, so I set up a campaign called Fair Fuel UK, and I managed to convince the RHA and FTA to back me for 10 years. And they did give some sponsorship to me, along with the RAC in the early years. So I brought together motorists and the commercial sector to say, how can we stop this? Because there's no doubt about it. We were miles ahead of everyone in the world of being the highest tax drivers. And we still are in diesel. We're still the highest tax drivers, even now, in terms of diesel, the commercial heartbeat of any economy, and petrol about eighth or ninth out of 200 countries. But anyway, I effectively that was in 2010. If you remember, Andrew, we had a certain David Cameron and Nick Clegg coming together in a in that coalition, and I managed to convince George Osborne as well to meet up, and we met up and we talked about it. And at that point, that we had Gordon Brown's fuel price escalator, which has come every single year, Andrew, where at every budget or even financial statement, the government would put up fuel duty by inflation plus a penny or two. And had we to still, Andrew?
You froze a little bit, rather like your fuel duty, but I think you might be back.
A nice segue, that, mate. I'm coming back. I'm afraid I've lost you completely. I can't see a thing.
Oh, well,
So,
I can see you.
okay, if I see, I'll keep talking if you can see me. Yeah, and what happened? And get something like 100,000 people for the first e-petition. If you remember, David Cameron introduced an e-petition whereby if you got 100,000 signatures to a cause or whatever, you on the House of Commons floor. And we
Well,
will
hang on, Howard.
fire debate.
We seem to just be losing you a little bit. What I suggest we do, we'll pause it briefly. Maybe you can log back in. We'll see if the connection's better. We're going to take a quick break. Don't touch that dial. Well, those hamsters are working double time on the wheels. We've now got Howard back. You've got problems with your internet.
Well, for some reason, it just crashed on me. I mean, I've got actually, fiber. It's very fast. I'm pleased the way it most of the time happens, but obviously every now and then, Gremlin gets in there and
The gremlin, as I say, rather like the fuel duty, you get it frozen. But we've survived, and you're back. You were explaining about that sort of stuff. You were backed for 10 years by some of those organisations. Why did they stop backing you?
Well, it's very, very simple. What happened was that despite the fact we did stop the freeze, and if people go to FairFuelUK.com, they can type in what we have saved for everything. Whether you're driving a motorbike or a 44-ton truck, you can type in your miles per gallon, the miles you do per year, and the type of fuel, and you'll see what would have happened if the fuel price escalator had remained. And obviously, in fact, fuel duty has gone down by 10% since 2010, thanks to Rishi Sunak in 2022 because of the Ukraine war, actually knocking 5p off.
Yeah. So give us an example then, Howard. I mean, the average motorist, how much have you saved them?
Well, if you look at an average family car with a 55-litre tank capacity, you're looking at, they do around about 7 to 10,000 miles a year, that sort of thing. We've saved them 15 to 18,000 pounds per year. No, since 2010. I apologise, not per year. Since 2010. But the big one, of course, is for the logistics industry. If you've got a 44-ton truck, which does about 7 miles to the gallon, you're looking at something like nearly £500,000 worth of savings since 2010, and that would have been passed on to us, and inflation would be rocking. We'd be in deep recession had we there's no promise that they would have continued to use the fuel price escalator. I've got to be honest about that, but if they had done, if you extrapolate what was planned, including with a conservative Lib Dem coalition, and even in up to the stage where the Conservatives won on their own, we would have had serious increases in fuel duty. And so I'm talking about the average family car. You're looking around about 10 to 20,000 pounds saving since 2010.
Fantastic. So that's everybody should be buying you a pint, even if that's got a bit of duty on it.
Yes, that's even worse. Absolutely right. The point is, that's not a pint isn't a central resource. What it is for me, but in terms of actually petrol and diesel, it is an essential resource. It's the commercial heartbeat of any economy, and the social heartbeat of any economy is transport.
Yeah.
And most people, 85% of people, rely on their vehicle, especially in rural areas. I live in a rural area. I'm going up to have an interview with the Spectator this morning, which would be an interesting chat. I'm just for the people here too. I'm actually talking about my time with Reform, so that'd be an interesting one.
Oh no, well, we'll get little highlights of that as well, because I do want to come on to that. But just on the fuel duty side, so you've saved all this money. As you say, people dropped out. The sponsorship side stopped after 10 years. Just to be clear, why did that stop?
Well, it's very, very simple, Andrew. They said I didn't have any environmental sensitivity because I don't support net zero. And this is the hypocrisy of these haulage associations, who all of their members drive diesel trucks. And diesel, I mean, if you had to put a battery on a 44-ton truck, you'd have to have another articulated being pulled at the back, the size of the truck itself. Right. I mean, it's absurd, and I've got wonderful support from truckers all around the country. They can't believe that I'm still not being supported, but I'm afraid this is what's happened in this country, Andrew. the control and the net zero sort of cult, unfortunately, is dominating our lives, led by Ed Miliband. And I'm fighting like mad with them. And I've got some fantastic support over the years. I have to give credit to one particular MP over that first 10 years of our campaigning, and that's a guy called Robert Halfon, who's a dear friend. And he was wonderful. He's Mr. Fairfield UK in Parliament, but there's loads of other great guys like Lord Craig McKinley, the Bionic Lord, who's a dear friend as well. They were wonderful in getting that message across, because I spent fortunes, Andrew, on independent economic analysis. The Centre of Economic Business Research, they did loads of studies, and we can come on to some of those in a minute. But fundamentally, every way you turn, high transport costs cost jobs, impacted on inflation, impacted on business investment, and prevented consumer spending, or lowered consumer spending. It's a no-brainer. This same thing. If you put more money into people's and small businesses' pockets, especially sole traders like plumbers, electricians, etc., you put money into their pockets, they spend it, they invest, and they, believe it or not, they'd have enough money to buy cleaner vehicles.
Oh, no, it totally makes sense. I mean, the sort of figures that you're talking about, the thousands per motorist and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands for relevant businesses, makes a huge difference. Finance, as you say, you basically were financed beforehand by some of these organisations. They pulled out after 10 years because of your net zero resistance, if you like. So how are you financed now?
Well, unfortunately, one of the big problems is my accountant actually came up to me about 6 months ago, and he said, "Look, I've done an analysis of the last 15 years, and you personally, or my business has personally spent close to £250,000. So you're looking about 20 to 25,000 pounds a year I've spent personally. I rely on donations from people, obviously, and that's the classic thing. And from 10 quid and 50 quid. As I'm speaking to you now, I can see in my bottom corner someone just spent £10. Right now. But
Yeah, my usual commission, Howard.
Yeah, but there's no doubt about it. Financially, so I'm struggling this, and this is the interesting thing, Andrew. I've got something like 1.8 million people who've signed up since 2010, of which a quarter of a million are very active for me. But the irony of it is there's 37 million drivers in this country. You imagine if I could get a quid off of every one of those, 37 million pounds. What I could do in terms of campaigning terms is phenomenal. But I'm afraid there's a lot of apathy, and it comes from across the whole political spectrum of what's happening in our lives. Our people just don't trust politicians, and they don't trust basically politics ever working for them.
Yeah, and I always say trust comes in on foot but leaves on horseback. And the reality is exactly that. Trust in politicians is at an all-time low. Trust in lots of people in the media, in the police and various other things. So we do need to restore that trust, because a lot of people are watching this to say, well, you've saved all this money. Why are you doing it? How much are you making?
Well, I don't make anything. Anyone can look at my accounts on Companies House and can see just how that for the last something like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, I've made a loss completely. So, and I'm not really trying. I could earn a lot of things in other areas. I've been offered loads of opportunities, and a lot of people want me to go on the speaker circuit to talk about this as well, and that sort of thing. You can earn money, but I'm 71 years of age now. And really, and I always joke about I should be tending my petunias now.
Hey, I've heard about that, but it's not that sort of a show.
Careful, Andrew. Yeah, but I don't not anybody, but I'm so angry with the way the motorist has been treated in this country. Drivers have been treated. I get. What really motivates me is when, through my letterbox, besides the dog poo I get from disgruntled cyclists and the Greens, I get in between those sort of threats, and I've had death threats and all sorts of things. You get these little envelopes that come through and you see on the outside that it's been written by someone who's a bit infirm. They can't write very well. And inside you can feel there's some coins in there. They've got a sellotape of five £1 coins, said, sorry, I can't give you more. And, this is a 91-year-old who relies on her little Peugeot, whatever. It does 80 miles to the gallon diesel, and she's had it for 25 years. And she's not allowed to go anywhere because of ULEZ and because of congestion charges and all that sort of thing. That what motivates me. And they just say, thank you so much for what you do. I really wish I could do more. That's the sort of thing that motivates me. And I've been in politics. That's exactly what I did. And when I stood for London Mayor, and why I was asked by Richard Tice and Nigel Farage to stand for London Mayor in 2024 was because of it wasn't my good looks. It's because I had 1.7 million people who signed up to the campaign.
That's your negotiating power, isn't it? It's the 1.7 million people who are backing you. That's obviously a very hefty part of the electorate. And so that's what you do. They use that as a negotiating tool.
Yeah, well, it is. It isn't. I mean, but the thing is, I said no to reform twice that I wouldn't stand, but the third time I said yes because people said, please fight the ULEZ expansion in London. So he can't. And there's another issue where we can talk about that in a minute. But I said, okay, I'll do this. And it's a shame that we fell out. Simply because freedom of speech. I said on a Dan Wootton show that I supported a guy called, you may have heard of him, called Tommy Robinson. And as soon as I said that, I got a phone call from Richard Tice, or in fact, it was a WhatsApp text to say, if you continue to talk positively about Tommy Robinson, we'll be forced to expel you from the party. And I've just stood for them. And they didn't give me any help in London. The only one that did actually turn up on the day I signed, or tick the box for voting for me in Westminster, was a guy called Rupert Lowe, you may have heard. And Rupert has become a firm friend because of that. He total support for me. He said I would have been a great mayor. He's saying that, not me. And I also stood down in Dover and Deal in the actual general election for reform. And in 3.5 weeks campaigning, I got 23% of the vote, came second. And had we had another couple of weeks, I might be sitting on the green benches. Who knows? But to cut a long story short, it's sad that a person who's you don't have to like Tommy, but what he did in terms of the child rape gang issue, bringing that to our attention. It's who else could have got the 2 to 3 million, whatever the number is, in last year, in London, following him. You wouldn't get any other politician that could have got that. And to cut a long story short, I'm glad I have left Reform, and because I don't trust them anymore. And I was a good friend of Nigel Farage. In one of his European election manifestos, they put a paragraph in there where I suggested we should cut fuel duty by 20 pence, and he said, yes, we'd do that. And how would you pay for it? By reducing overseas aid. We had it all covered, and those sorts of things. So that's where we are now. And, I'm very saddened because there's a lot of good people in Reform who are friends, and they're all were upset that what happened to me. And as you know, Andrew, loads of people have been thrown under the bus, like Rupert, like Ben Habib, and I can go on forever about lots of other people who suffered basically because, if you don't follow the leadership's, you toe their line, that's it. You're out. You're thrown out.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of things, and you're brilliant at teasing. Coming up soon, I'm going to come back to that. We're going to unpack a little bit more. So let's unpack some of those things. I mean, firstly, the benefit to business. You said there's a number of reports which make a lot of sense that if you don't overtax people and you give them basically some sort of assistance, so you don't overtax them on their fuel costs, it's going to be good for business. Talk to me about some of those reports.
Well, there's two or three, but I mentioned two. The first one we did was actually, what did it mean in terms of actually what happened if we at that point you increase fuel duty by 3p, and don't forget VAT's on top of that. It's like this 5p going up in the autumn budget. That will be 6p, because it's the immoral, dishonest taxation, double taxation is just that is obscene beyond belief, I think. But we did a one with it was planned to go up by 3p. So the CBR did some research on it, and they worked out what it would do to the economy. And the actual detail of it was it would have cost something like 300,000 jobs across the country, mainly in the delivery sector. And don't forget, this was the beginning when we did this report of the internet delivery what we've got now, everything is delivered to, and that unfortunately is great for the control by governments, because obviously the 15-minute cities we can talk about. There's another tease for you, but the essence of this was that the inflation would have gone up. And I can't remember the exact figure, but a 3p increase would deliver something like a 0.2% increase in inflation. As I said, 300,000 jobs it would have cost. Consumer spending would have fallen by, I can't remember the exact figure, but because this was 5, 6, 7 years ago, that particular report. The second report was, of course, this horrible thing we've got, which is the 2030 ban on new petrol, new diesel car sales. We're only 3 years away from that now. And I did a report on that with the Motorcycle Action Group and the Alliance of British Drivers, who kindly financed it, which I'm thankful to them, because I'm very close to those guys for obvious reasons. And we proved that the 2030 ban would actually cost 5 times the benefits. Now, go figure. I mean, it's something like the benefits are about 80 billion, but it would cost 400 billion to introduce the 2030 ban. And also the impact on our manufacturing. You know, our car manufacturing is in massive decline in this country, and they would have to plan. So when you plan a production line, you need about 6, 7 years, and now we're in a situation with 3 years. To go back to a fossil fuel production line is very difficult, even though we're seeing that Bentley, Toyota, Volkswagen, they are now actually continuing to make diesel and petrol cars in Europe. So we'll be importing those. But the thing is, the madness of net zero, the 2030 ban. I mean, if imagine me, you're the Minister of Transport, and I knock on your door and I'm one of your spads. Hey, Andrew, I've got this wonderful idea. I can save 80 billion if we introduce a ban on, new petrol and diesel car sales. And you go, wait, fantastic. Oh, great. Oh, by the way, how much is it going to cost? Oh, it's going to cost us 400 billion. You just throw me out the window, wouldn't you? I mean, the whole thing is just, I just don't understand what's in people like Ed Miliband and these ideologues in government now. They're continuing. The good thing about Rishi Sunak is when we presented that report, he moved it from 2030 to 2035. So we were quite pleased about that. And don't forget, Boris Johnson brought it in from 2040 down to 2035 to 2030. He was just as bad. And along the lines of, Theresa May in 2019 in a 2-hour debate put on the statute books net zero. Just a 2-hour debate. These are the sorts of things. And so, and I'm calling for through the campaign that we have a referendum on the net zero. It's that important to people, and they're given the facts. And this is what happens when you talk to the Greens, Andrew, about this. When you actually, there's no, they don't debate. They're just a motive. It's killing children or something like that. All these sorts of things, the poor emissions and the global warming and that sort of thing. But when you actually talk to them, show us the proof and the facts, they haven't got them.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And what I love about this longer show that I do on the Andrew Eborn Show is that we can unpack those things. Obviously, as you know, you and I met in traditional TV studios, so I do those as well. But the interviews are a lot shorter. So I always say that we underestimate the electorate, and if you give them the facts and you make sure it's evidence-based, they can make informed decisions. And I don't have allegiances to any political party. You and I have had that discussion, and I think that's right, because you can then remain independent, hold people's feet to the fire where necessary, but let the audience decide. And having that debate without just sort of labelling somebody as, well, you're just a lefty or you're just a far right, which is a horrendous slur as well. Basically, you need to get away from these labels. So we just talk about it in the way that you have done, say, look, this is what it's costing us. You turn around and say, look, this is the results. These are the different reports that say there are benefits. The net benefit is this. People understand that, and I don't know why people are being stopped from being given that information.
You're absolutely right. And the important thing about this net zero debate, especially related to cars and driving, is that if we'd allowed the market to dictate what you drive, in terms of, the emissions standard for diesel and petrol is a thing called Euro 6. And that's been around now for about 8 or 9 years. Had we allowed that to develop, we'd be at Euro 7, 8 or 9 now. And the emissions coming out of these Euro 7, Euro 8 engines will be negligible. I mean, in the last 10 to 15 years, the logistics industry has halved its emissions. And there's also things like fuel catalysts. These fuel catalysts are a legal requirement in some countries, and particularly in America and certain states. Texas, for example, every single delivery to the forecourt contains these fuel catalysts, and they are reducing emissions by half, by 50%. I repeat, by half, and improving fuel efficiency by 15%. In other words, to fill up your tank, it's going to cost 15% less.
Right.
So why isn't anyone in this country, saying that should be a legal requirement? They did do one recently, didn't they? They moved, if you fill up your car with petrol, ethanol was 5%. Now we've got 10% ethanol. That doesn't really improve or save the planet any more than I'm talking about with these fuel catalysts. Why are they not looking at these solutions and allowing fuel technology to evolve and develop naturally? We would not be having this discussion.
Yeah. So why do you think that is, though, Howard?
Well, they seem wedded to this whole green agenda of driving, forcing us back to 15-minute cities and the horse and cart mentality. That's the approach, and it's purely a political ideology, and it's driven. I look how the rise of the Greens. The Greens now aren't talking about the environment; they're just talking about getting empowered. Look what happened in Dalton and Denton. Up there in the recent by-election. They won on the basis of nothing to do with actually saving the planet. They're talking about actually, in the ideology of the Islamic faith. That's the thing that's happening now. We've gone past anything to do about, what happened to Greenpeace and all these people that we used to see regularly, tying themselves to, next to stations, aircraft, RAF stations, stopping things happening. What we're seeing now, all we're seeing at the moment is political ideology. And it's so sad because I go back to that person, that 90-year-old gave me those 5 £1 coins underneath a piece of sellotape. That person desperately needs, to be motivated. They're depressed. They don't go out. They can't afford to pay their electricity bill. There's a person not far from me. I paid their recently electricity bill because I knocked on their door. And when I went into them to see them, I haven't seen them for a bit, they were wrapped up in blankets sitting in a corner. I said, "Why are you doing that?" She said, "What?" And she showed me a bill. And they sent her a bill, this widow, about mid-80s, and she was sitting there looking at this bill, and it was just holding her hand, and it said, that they overestimated by some stupid amount. I can't remember the figure, something like £1,500 when it should have been £50. And she wouldn't switch on anyone else. So we sorted that out. But that's what our government is not looking after the people that really need looking after, and that's what I'm trying to do in my role in life.
Yeah, and I think it is, as I say, it's so important when you look at each of those issues to actually populate it with evidence and facts and so on and so forth. And on the whole net zero thing, absolutely have the discussion. We want to save our planet, but let's be realistic about it. When you're turning around and say you get big polluters like China or India, the bit that we do, you say, well, to what extent is that true? What is the net benefit and so on and so forth? And why aren't they looking at these alternatives, which could also have massive impact?
Absolutely, and there's so many stat. This is one stat. The whole of the diesel fleet in the world of cars and trucks and everything, their emissions are less than the 20 super tankers that go around the world. You just think, just 20 ships emit more than the whole of the diesel fleet in the world.
Right, and where's that stat from?
Oh, well, I can't remember exact details, but I mean, I can get that to you. And
yeah, no, have it. I mean, always very much, as you know, we'd like to say, look, give people the evidence, give them links so they can check it out, so we can do that. Because so many people make claims and they don't substantiate them. But let's have a look at that. That's quite an alarming statistic. We're going to take... Yeah, we're going to take a quick break. We are going to come back because you've teased all sorts of things. We'll make sure the hamsters are working. We're going to look at you, Les. We're going to look at the current position as a result of the conflict in the Middle East. We're also going to talk about you and Sadiq Khan, 15-minute cities, and much, much more. All of that's coming up. Do not touch that dial. But for now, Howard, thank you very much for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Hello, my name's Howard Cox. I'm the founder of the Fairfield UK campaign. I'm delighted to be on the incredible Andrew Eborn Show, one of the few independent stations that I've actually do a fair bit of coverage with, who actually gets to the meat of every political issue. I strongly recommend that you press the button down here and subscribe to the Andrew Eborn Show.